Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into Peter T. O'Brien's Theology of Hebrews. Now, this is a text that's honestly just as fascinating for its profound, brilliant insights as it is for the dramatic academic scandal that ended up bringing it down. I mean, what exactly happens when we're forced to separate the beauty of a theological masterpiece from the academic integrity of the person who wrote it? Well, let's find out.
Okay, so picture this massive paradox for a second. You have this masterful theology book written by a highly revered scholar, and then suddenly, it just vanishes from publisher shelves back in August 2016. How does a book recognized for such incredible exegetical depth, published by a major academic press no less, end up being universally pulled from circulation? That is the exact mystery and the masterpiece we're unraveling today.
So here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover a masterpiece pulled from shelves, theology of the speaking God, salvation and severe warnings, the denominational divide, the plagiarism controversy, and finally, the verdict and recommendations. Let's get right into it.
Part 1. A masterpiece pulled from shelves.
To really understand the drama here, we first need to get a grip on the profound what of this book. Like, what did O'Brien originally set out to achieve? His governing thesis is that the book of Hebrews isn't just your standard run-of-the-mill letter. No, he argues it's actually a pastoral homily, a logos parakleseos, delivered to a congregation of Jewish Christians in Rome during the late 60s. And these folks were under intense external pressure. I mean, imagine the stress they were dealing with. They were severely tempted to just abandon their Christian confession entirely and revert to Old Covenant worship. So O'Brien approaches Hebrews not as some dry academic textbook, but as an urgent, vibrant sermon that was desperately trying to keep a struggling congregation afloat.
Moving on to Part 2, Theology of the Speaking God.
Now, this is where it gets super interesting. O'Brien's most original contribution to the study of Hebrews is his intense focus on divine speech. He brilliantly illustrates that the entire theology of Hebrews is built on three progressive modes of the speaking God. First, God speaks through the Old Testament, and O'Brien points out this fascinating little detail. Hebrews literally never introduces an Old Testament quote with a verb of writing. It's always a verb of speaking. It treats the scriptures as the living, present voice of God. Second, God speaks in and through the Son, which is the climactic revelation. And third, and this is the really provocative part, God speaks in the letter to the Hebrews itself, meaning the author actually understood their own sermon as participating in divine speech. The preacher is standing there as God's literal spokesman.
Which brings us to Part 3, Salvation and Severe Warnings. When we move into Chapter 3 of the book, we see how all of this builds into this incredibly intricate, multi-layered view of salvation. Rather than just reducing salvation down to a single concept, O'Brien traces these 5 distinct but totally interconnected registers of salvation imagery. So atonement is the foundation, right? Drawn straight from the Day of Atonement rituals. But he also highlights Christ's victory over the devil, which is achieved indirectly by removing the sin that gave the devil his power in the first place. Then we also see Exodus redemption, forensic approval before the divine judge, and this really beautiful concept of inheritance and rest, basically tracing a typological line all the way from Canaan right to the heavenly Jerusalem. It's not just a one-note song, it's a deliberately layered, comprehensive symphony of human salvation.
Next up is Part 4, the denominational divide.
All right, the crucial point here is how this really rich theology crashes into some unacknowledged biases, especially when we hit the severe warning passages in Hebrews. You can really see how O'Brien's background as an emeritus faculty member at Moore Theological College, which is a distinctly Reformed Calvinist institution, completely colors his interpretation. Hebrews contains these intense warnings about falling away. O'Brien interprets them straight through a Reformed lens, arguing the audience is a mixed congregation of both true and false believers. So when Hebrews uses conditional phrases like, if indeed we hold our conviction, O'Brien reads this as an evidence inference statement, basically meaning persevering faith is the evidence that you belong to Christ, not the cause of it. And this stands in really stark contrast to the Arminian view, which reads these exact same texts as genuine warnings to true believers about the very real possibility of losing their salvation. And that actually illustrates a major critique of the book. As an impartial explainer, it's vital to point out that O'Brien presents his Reformed reading simply as the definitive biblical view, without really acknowledging it as a tradition-specific lens. He just doesn't adequately contest other scholarly perspectives. For example, he completely bypasses I. Howard Marshall's major Arminian defense, and he totally ignores the Roman Catholic exegetical tradition regarding the once-for-all nature of Christ's sacrifice and how it relates to the Eucharist. For what's supposed to be a comprehensive academic theology, that's a pretty notable blind spot. All right, moving to part 5, the plagiarism controversy.
Now we hit the big, wait a minute portion of our explainer. The elephant in the room regarding the sudden withdrawal of the book. After allegations surfaced about unattributed material, IVP Academic investigated and ultimately pulled the book entirely. O'Brien issued a very clear public apology, noting that his work processes had at times been faulty, resulting in what he described as unintentional plagiarism. And honestly, here is the fatal flaw. Because of this, it's virtually impossible to know for sure which secondary source engagements are O'Brien's original synthesis and which are unacknowledged reproductions of other scholars' work. It might not automatically falsify his grand theological arguments about Hebrews, but it completely shatters the book's scholarly usability in the academic world.
Finally, Part 6, Final Verdict and Recommendations.
So, this brings us to our final resolution. How exactly should we evaluate a book with such incredible theological insights, but deeply compromised academic integrity? Well, because the theological argument itself is substantively sound, especially that fascinating framework on the speech of God and his multi-layered view of salvation, the book earns a recommended with reservation status. It actually remains an excellent resource for pastors preparing sustained teaching, seminary students looking for synthetic theology, and serious lay readers. But on the flip side, we absolutely cannot recommend it for academic researchers needing reliable citations, institutional courses requiring in-print texts, or anyone looking for serious, unbiased engagement with Arminian or Catholic theological traditions.
We're going to leave you with this final thought to ponder today. When a piece of work offers such a beautiful, pastoral, and vibrant picture of the biblical text, yet totally fails the basic structural rules of academic publishing, what do we do with it? It's this messy intersection of brilliant pastoral theology and rigid academic standards. How do we balance profound theological illumination against the strict necessity of academic integrity? How do we appreciate theological beauty while never compromising on intellectual honesty? Something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.